Life on the planet of the Carven had always been different from the rest of the galaxy. Their world was wild, unpredictable, and filled with challenges from the moment a creature opened its eyes. The land shifted with sudden storms. The mountains released heat from deep underground, and the forests grew so dense that sunlight touched the ground only for a few hours each day. No species lived there easily, and only the ones with the greatest endurance survived long enough to shape a civilization. The Carven themselves were known everywhere as the strongest species ever to evolve on a so-called Deathworld, a place so demanding that most other life forms would not last even a day. Their bodies were tough because their world gave them no choice. Their senses were sharp because danger never announced itself. Their traditions focused on self-reliance and discipline because cooperation was something their ancestors rarely had the luxury to depend on. For generations, outsiders had seen them as an intimidating presence. Many other species preferred to keep their distance, believing that the Carven respected only strength and nothing else. Stories spread across space stories about their endurance, their fearlessness, and a quiet, firm way of dealing with any difficulty. Over time, these stories turned into legends, and legends turned into myths. Soon the Carven became something almost symbolic, proof that the universe produced beings tougher than imagination itself. But within the Carven society, life was not as harsh as outsiders imagined. They had structure, routines, and a sense of purpose. They believed deeply in understanding the world around them. Their young learned to observe the land, feel the shifts in the environment, and adapt before trouble arrived. They learned calmness, because panic never solved anything. They learned patience because their world rewarded thoughtful actions more than fast ones. And most importantly, they learned respect for the balance of life, the understanding that everything had a role, even the smallest creatures. Their culture valued strength, but not in the simple sense many thought. The Carven believed that true strength came from understanding yourself and your environment. To them, being strong was not about overpowering others, but surviving with dignity and control. Their elders often repeated a saying passed down through centuries: "Remain still, and the storm will show you its path." It meant that wisdom allowed you to survive more easily than force alone. Still, despite this philosophy, they could not ignore that the galaxy viewed them with a mix of awe and fear. Other species rarely approached them without caution. Some greeted them with nervous politeness. Others avoided them completely. The Carven accepted this reaction quietly. They did not see it as an insult. They understood that fear often came from lack of understanding, and they never felt the need to correct these misunderstandings. Their focus stayed on their own development, their research, and keeping their planet functional. However, over many cycles, curiosity started to grow among the younger generation. They saw other species traveling through the stars. They observed their technologies, their communication methods, their drives to explore, and they wondered what it would be like to learn from them, not to compete or challenge, but simply to exchange knowledge. Their planet had taught them everything about hardship, but little about friendship or cooperation. And so, a quiet desire began forming among the Carven, the desire to understand outsiders more deeply. Among all the civilizations they monitored, one species caught their attention more than the rest: humans. At first, the Carven didn't think much about them. Humans came from a world that, by comparison, seemed entirely ordinary. Their planet was not as rough or unpredictable as the Carven's home. Their bodies were not exceptionally strong or resistant. Their size, their speed, and even their senses seemed unremarkable. On paper, the Carven found nothing that stood out, but the more they watched humans expand into the stars, the more they noticed something strange. Humans kept going into places where they did not seem suited to survive. They built research stations near unstable regions of space. They ventured into unexplored territories with confidence. They took risks that made no sense based on their physical limits. And somehow, more often than not, they succeeded. Their success rate was so consistent that the Carven grew curious. Why did a species that appeared physically average achieve so much? This question bothered the Carven scientists for years. They studied human communication, watched their broadcasts, analyzed their travel patterns, and tried to understand the logic behind their actions. But nothing fit into the Carven worldview. Humans were unpredictable. They approached challenges with a mix of creativity and stubbornness. They laughed at things the Carven considered serious. They took comfort in community instead of facing the world alone. Their behavior made no sense by the old traditions of the Carven. The more they watched, the more the Carven realized that humans were truly different. Not because of their strength, but because of their mindset. Some elders felt uneasy about this unpredictability. They believed that understanding humans might require shifting long-held beliefs. Others felt excited, seeing humans as a doorway to new ideas. Still, a silent agreement formed among all. Humans were worth observing more closely. To satisfy this curiosity, the Carven sent a small exploration team to travel through regions where humans were known to operate. Their mission was not confrontation or alliance. It was simply observation. They wanted to see humanity up close, how they interacted, how they reacted, how they communicated without filtered data. As the ship left their planet's orbit, there was a quiet sense of both pride and uncertainty. The Carven knew that. This journey marked a turning point. For the first time, they were not exploring the galaxy with the intention of testing themselves or proving something. They were exploring because they wanted to understand another species that lived so differently. During the journey, the crew often discussed what they expected to see. Some predicted humans to be fragile yet bold. Others expected them to be friendly, but chaotic. A few believed humans would be unimpressive. But all agreed on one thing. Humanity was mysterious. When they entered human-patrolled space, their instruments picked up signals that didn't match anything they had studied before. Human communication was filled with emotion, humor, pauses, and sudden shifts in tone. It carried a warmth that felt unfamiliar. The Carven listened silently, unsure whether to interpret this behavior as confidence or something else entirely. The deeper they traveled, the more signs of human activity. They found small stations, travel beacons, messages left between ships. Humans seemed to treat space not as a dangerous void, but as a place full of potential. This attitude surprised the Carven. Their own people approached every unknown region with caution first, analysis second, and action third. Humans, on the other hand, often took action first and figured out the rest as they went. The Carven crew finally spotted a human research vessel near the edge of a glowing nebula. The ship was small, far smaller than the Carven expected for such a hazardous area. It drifted calmly as if surveying the unstable clouds of energy nearby. If the Carven had been in the humans' place, they would have kept a safer distance. But humans seemed comfortable, as though danger and curiosity existed in equal measure. The Carven watched from afar at first, simply observing the humans move around their ship, talking through their channels, adjusting their equipment. Even these small actions felt strangely fascinating. There was an ease to their movement, a sense of trust they had in one another. Their teamwork was natural, not forced. Their communication carried a tone of familiarity that the Carven rarely used. As they prepared to move closer and reveal themselves, the Carven felt something unusual, something they rarely experienced. Anticipation mixed with uncertainty. They were finally about to meet the species that confused them, intrigued them, and challenged all their assumptions. None of them knew that this meeting would be the beginning of the greatest change their civilization would ever experience. And none of them imagined that humanity, a species they once considered ordinary, would reshape everything the Carven believed about strength, survival, and the meaning of connection. The Carven ship moved closer to the human vessel, scanning it with careful attention. From a distance, the humans looked ordinary, nothing that suggested they could surprise anyone. Yet as the Carven watched, a quiet tension began to build among the crew. There was an expectation of some kind of reaction, fear, alertness, or maybe an attempt to communicate in a cautious way. That is what the Carven were used to seeing in every other species they encountered. But the humans did not behave in any predictable manner. When the Carven ship finally came into view, the humans did not panic or hide. They did not call for reinforcements or activate defensive shields. Instead, they seemed to notice the new presence almost casually. One of the humans moved to the observation deck and without hesitation waved at the Carven vessel. The gesture was simple, ordinary, yet it carried an unexpected kind of confidence. It was not the defiance or aggression the Carven expected. It was something far stranger, openness. The Carven crew exchanged looks, a silent conversation passing. Between them, could it be that these humans were fearless? Or were they foolish? Either way, the Carven could not simply leave without understanding more. So they decided to approach, not aggressively, but in a way that allowed the humans to respond first. They opened communication channels, a simple greeting in multiple languages, both verbal and visual. The human ship responded immediately, their own messages filled with curiosity rather than alarm. It was remarkable to the Carven. No other species had ever responded with this kind of calm, this level of poise. Most species would have assumed a threat and reacted defensively, often with aggression. Humans, however, seemed to treat the encounter as a shared moment of discovery, as though two travelers had accidentally met on a path and were merely acknowledging one another's presence. The Carven found this behavior fascinating and, in a way, unsettling. They had never encountered a species that balanced confidence with friendliness so naturally. The humans' movements on their ship were casual but precise. They did not panic when the Carven approached closer, nor did they try to hide. Instead, they continued with their work, occasionally glancing at the new ship in a way that suggested mild interest. The Carven noted that even though the humans were in an unfamiliar and potentially dangerous situation, they did not seem afraid. They were aware of the Carven's presence, yet they did not see it as an immediate threat. Their calmness was unlike anything the Carven had seen. One of the Carven scientists spoke softly, suggesting that they attempt a more direct approach. A small docking maneuver was prepared, not as an attack, but as a gesture of willingness to engage. The humans noticed immediately and responded with what could only be described as encouragement. It was as if they were inviting the Carven to come closer, to share space and knowledge without fear. This level of trust was foreign to the Carven, who were used to being met with suspicion and caution. When the docking was complete, the Carven crew slowly disembarked onto the human vessel. They expected tension, hesitation, maybe even panic, but none of that occurred. The humans welcomed them in a manner that was polite, calm, and strangely warm. They guided the Carven through the ship, explaining systems, routines, and methods, with an ease that suggested years of experience working together as a team. The Carven observed everything closely. The humans were not trying to impress them. They were simply being themselves, naturally and openly. The Carven began to notice details they had not expected. The humans' ship was not heavily fortified, nor was it filled with powerful weapons. Instead, it relied on efficiency, intelligence, and adaptability. Every tool, every control, every movement seemed designed for flexibility rather than brute force. The Carven realized that humans approached challenges differently. Where they themselves relied on strength, humans relied on creativity and collaboration. Where they expected rigid discipline, humans seemed to thrive on a balance of planning and improvisation. It was a perspective that challenged everything the Carven thought they knew. During their time aboard, the Carven began small experiments, not dangerous ones, but simple interactions designed to test human reflexes, responses, and problem-solving skills. In each case, the humans adapted quickly, sometimes in ways that surprised the Carven entirely. A simple obstacle course, designed to be difficult for the Carven, was completed by the humans with solutions that were clever, unexpected, and efficient. There was no hesitation, no fear, no arrogance, just a calm confidence in facing the unknown. It was a demonstration of resilience that the Carven had never anticipated. As they spent more time observing, the Carven noticed something even more remarkable: the human's ability to communicate without conflict, even under pressure. When small errors occurred, the humans did not assign blame or panic. They discussed quietly, exchanged ideas, and corrected problems together. The Carven had never seen such a method in other species. On most worlds, even minor mistakes could escalate into arguments or aggressive responses. Humans, by contrast, seemed to treat mistakes as opportunities for learning, for adaptation, for growth. The Carven also began to recognize the emotional intelligence of humans. They were capable of expressing concern, curiosity, humor, and empathy in ways that seemed to create bonds stronger than any physical display of power. A minor accident during a routine test one that would have caused fear or alarm on many other species' vessels was met with calm reassurance, laughter, and immediate problem-solving. To the Carven, this combination of emotional awareness and action-oriented response was a type of strength they had never considered. During these encounters, the Carven realized that they were learning as much from the humans as the humans were learning from them. The humans asked questions about Carven technology, biology, and customs. They listened patiently, often repeating back information to ensure understanding. They did not rush or dismiss what was unfamiliar. They engaged with care, curiosity, and respect. This approach, so simple yet so powerful, impressed the Carven deeply. They began to understand that strength could take many forms, and that wisdom was not always about dominance or endurance. The Carven also noticed how humans worked together. Each human seemed aware of the other's strengths and weaknesses. They coordinated tasks intuitively, often without speaking. There was a shared understanding of responsibility, a sense of mutual trust that held their team together even in challenging circumstances. The Carven had never seen such a seamless combination of independence and cooperation. It was unlike anything they had learned on their own planet, where survival often required a solitary focus and personal resilience above all else. In quiet moments, the Carven reflected on their expectations. They had come prepared for confrontation, for tension, or at least for a display of caution. Instead, they found openness, trust, and calmness. The humans did not see them as a threat or an enemy. They treated the Carven as equals, as partners in exploration, as fellow travelers in a vast, unknown universe. This simple recognition, this acceptance without fear, had a profound effect on the Carven crew. It forced them to reconsider their assumptions about other species, and perhaps even about themselves. By the time the Carven prepared to leave, they had gathered more than data, they had gathered understanding. They realized that humans were not strong in the same way. The Carven were strong, but they possessed a resilience and courage that could not be measured in physical terms alone. They had endurance not just in body, but in mind and spirit. They were creative, adaptable, and remarkably capable of working together. Most importantly, They were unafraid to engage with the unknown, even when it posed real risks. This combination, the Carven realized, was a kind of power they had never considered. As the Carven returned to their ship and prepared to depart, there was a sense of quiet reflection among the crew. The encounter had been more than an observation mission. It had been a revelation. They had learned that strength was not just about surviving harsh worlds or enduring physical challenges. Strength could also mean trusting others, being adaptable, and facing uncertainty with courage and calm. The humans, in their ordinary appearance and extraordinary approach to life, had taught the Carven something no survival test on their own planet ever could. The Carven ship departed, leaving the human vessel behind, but the encounter was far from over. Every member of the Carven crew carried a new understanding, a shift in perspective that would influence their decisions, their research, and their society. They realized that the universe was not just a place to test strength, but also a place to learn from others in ways that had nothing to do with dominance or fear. They had come seeking observation, and they left with insight, curiosity, and a sense of unexpected connection. The memory of the humans' calm courage, their willingness to engage without fear, and their cooperative spirit stayed with the Carven long after they left human space. It was a quiet lesson, but one that would grow over time. They had met a species they had expected to be weak, yet this species showed a form of strength that challenged everything the Carven had ever believed. And for the first time in their history, the Carven began to wonder if meeting humanity might change not just their understanding of the galaxy, but their understanding of themselves. After the initial encounter, the Carven returned, their ship with a mix of surprise and curiosity that none of them had felt before. The humans had not behaved like any species they had ever studied. They were neither overly cautious nor reckless, neither weak nor overconfident. Their reactions had been measured, natural, and in some ways baffling. The Carven spent hours reviewing every observation, analyzing every gesture, tone, and response, trying to understand what made these humans so unusual. It quickly became clear that humans were full of contradictions. They were physically weaker than the Carven, but they seemed to endure challenges in ways the Carven could not measure. They were small, fragile, and ordinary in appearance, yet they had a kind of inner resilience that the Carven had never seen before. They faced danger calmly, made mistakes without panic, and somehow, consistently, found solutions that worked. It did not fit into any model of survival or strength that the Carven had relied on for generations. The Carven elders held long discussions about the encounter. Some of them were cautious, warning that humans were unpredictable, and unpredictability could be dangerous. Others argued that unpredictability was precisely what made humans fascinating. One of the younger Carven, who had spent more time observing humans than anyone else, pointed out that humans had a unique ability to turn their weaknesses into strengths. This idea struck a chord with the council. They had always measured strength in terms of endurance, speed, and power, but humans had demonstrated that resilience could take a different form. Over the following cycles, the Carven continued to observe humans from a distance. They watched human colonies, research stations, and exploration teams. They noticed patterns that were both familiar and unusual. Humans worked in groups, but not rigidly. They communicated openly, but also intuitively. They made mistakes, yet each mistake seemed to teach them something new. And most importantly, they faced situations the Carven would consider impossible. Yet they never gave up. The more the Carven studied, the more their assumptions about humans began to crumble. They had expected to see fear or weakness. Yet humans approached challenges with curiosity and calm determination. They had expected chaos, yet humans often organized themselves instinctively, solving problems in ways the Carven could not predict. This combination of qualities, courage, adaptability, cooperation, was something the Carven had never seen outside of their own most disciplined warriors. And even those warriors rarely showed the creativity and flexibility that humans displayed naturally. That one observation stood out in particular. The Carven had set up a small probe near a human research vessel to monitor their response to an unexpected event. The probe released a sudden technical problem, a situation that would normally create panic in other species. The humans noticed almost immediately. Rather than reacting with fear or frustration, they paused for a moment, then began to collaborate. Some humans suggested solutions, while others tested them, and the problem was resolved quickly and efficiently. The Carven had watched countless species handle emergencies, but none had reacted with such calm and coordinated action. This observation sparked debate among the Carven scientists. They wondered if this was instinct, intelligence, or something else entirely. They concluded that humans had a unique combination of qualities that allowed them to thrive despite physical limitations. They were resilient, adaptive, and capable of deep cooperation. They did not rely solely on individual strength, but on the collective ability of the group. This was not something the Carven had experienced in its pure form. On their planet, survival often depended on personal skill and endurance, not on relying on others. Humans demonstrated that vulnerability, when paired with trust, could be a kind of strength. The Carven also noticed emotional intelligence in humans. They observed humans comforting one another after stressful events, celebrating small successes, and working together even when there was no immediate reward. Humans seemed to understand that success was not only about surviving danger, but about supporting each other, learning together, and maintaining balance. The Carven had never fully considered emotional connection as a form of power. Strength had always been physical, mental, or strategic. Now they were seeing a new kind of strength emerging, one that was subtle but powerful. Curiosity soon became fascination. The Carven wanted to understand more about why humans behaved the way they did. They began sending small messages, friendly probes, and observational signals, testing communication and reactions. The humans responded each time with patience and calm. They were not afraid of the Carven presence. Instead, they treated the Carven as partners in observation, sharing knowledge, asking questions, and even humorously suggesting solutions to technical problems. Their openness, trust, and willingness to share created a bond that the Carven had never expected. During one of these exchanges, the Carven encountered a situation that challenged their understanding even further. A minor accident occurred aboard the human vessel, something that could have caused panic or chaos. To the Carven's surprise, the humans did not panic. Instead, they calmly assessed the situation, helped each other, and solved the problem with remarkable efficiency. What struck the Carven most was the way humans maintained morale and focus. They did not place blame. They did not argue. They simply worked together, trusting each other and using creativity to overcome the challenge. This moment left the Carven deeply thoughtful. They realized that humans were capable of achieving extraordinary outcomes without the kind of rigid discipline or physical prowess the Carven had always considered essential. The human strength was subtle, woven into the way they thought, acted, and collaborated. It was a type of resilience that the Carven could admire, but had never truly understood. As time passed, the Carven began to reflect on their own civilization. They recognized that their approach to life focused on individual strength, endurance, and survival had limitations. They had never relied on trust or cooperation beyond necessity, and they rarely encouraged creativity in dealing with the unexpected. Humans, on the other hand, embraced uncertainty and turned it into opportunity. This realization sparked quiet debate among the Carven leaders. Could they learn from humans? Could their society adapt to incorporate some of these lessons? The Carvin began to consider the possibility that humanity's approach to life, its adaptability, cooperation, and emotional awareness was not weakness at all. It was a form of intelligence and resilience that had allowed them to thrive in ways that defied logic. This insight challenged centuries of belief about what it meant to be strong. The Carvin had always equated strength with dominance and endurance, but now they saw strength in flexibility, trust, and creative problem-solving. Humans had shown them a new path, one that did not rely on physical power alone. Not by the time the Carvin returned to their home planet. They carried with them more than data. They carried a new understanding, a shift in perspective that would influence not just their research, but their culture as a whole. The humans had revealed a form of strength that was different, but equally, if not more, powerful than anything the Carvin had known. The Carvin began to discuss how this new understanding could be applied to their society, how they might incorporate cooperation, trust, and creativity alongside traditional skills. The encounter also sparked personal reflection among the Carvin crew. Each member began to consider their own assumptions, biases, and habits. They realized that they had underestimated species that did not conform to their ideas of strength. They saw that courage could be quiet, resilience could be subtle, and power could be measured in relationships rather than raw force. These lessons changed the way they thought about not just humans, but their own people. In quiet moments, the Carvin found themselves thinking about the humans' calm confidence, their ability to face danger with curiosity rather than fear, and their remarkable adaptability. They realized that these qualities were not something that could be taught easily. They were cultivated through experience, trust, and a willingness to engage with the unknown. Humans had developed these skills naturally, and the Carvin could only admire and study them, learning from each encounter. By the end of their observation period, the Carvin had come to an important conclusion. Humans were not weaker or ordinary as they had initially assumed. They were different, and in that difference lay their true power. Their strength was a combination of adaptability, cooperation, creativity, and emotional intelligence. It was a form of resilience that allowed them to thrive in ways that defied conventional expectations. The Carvin realized that meeting humanity had begun to change the way they understood the galaxy, their place in it, and even the meaning of strength itself. This understanding did not come suddenly, nor was it easy. It took time, reflection, and careful observation, but the impact was undeniable. The Carvin had encountered a species they could not measure by traditional standards, and in that encounter they had discovered something new, not just about humans, but about themselves. It was a lesson that would continue to unfold, guiding future decisions, strategies, and perhaps the evolution of their civilization in ways they had never imagined. The humans, without knowing it, had challenged everything the Carvin thought. They knew. They had shown that weakness could be disguised as strength, that courage could be quiet, and that survival could rely as much on connection and adaptability as on endurance or power. And the Carvin, for the first time, began to understand that meeting another species could be less about confrontation or measurement, and more about learning, respect, and growth. By the time the Carvin left human space, they carried with them a deep curiosity and a newfound admiration. They did not yet know what the future would bring, but they understood that humanity had left a permanent impression on their civilization. The Carvin had met a species they could not fully predict, and that unpredictability had begun to change them in ways that would ripple through generations. The journey had started as an observation, but it had become something far more significant. The Carvin had met a species that challenged their assumptions, expanded their understanding, and showed them a new way of thinking about strength, survival, and connection. It was a lesson that would not be forgotten, and it was only the beginning of a relationship that promised to reshape the Carven perspective forever. The Carven had been observing humanity for some time, learning, analyzing, and reflecting. Every encounter had offered insights that challenged their understanding of strength, resilience, and intelligence. But nothing could have prepared them for the crisis that would bring the two species together in a way they never expected. It began as a routine observation near a bright, unstable nebula. Humans had sent a small research vessel to study the phenomena, carefully monitoring the fluctuations in energy and radiation. The Carven, ever curious, had positioned themselves nearby, silently watching how the humans conducted their experiments. They expected the humans to be cautious, to retreat at the first sign of danger. After all, the nebula was unpredictable, and no species could survive a sudden flare without risk. But humans did not retreat. They continued their work calmly, making minor adjustments, checking instruments, and observing the patterns in the film. Nebula's movement. The Carven watched with a mixture of admiration and concern. The humans' confidence was remarkable, but it also seemed fragile. One miscalculation could have severe consequences. The Carven considered intervening, but something in the humans' behavior told them to wait. There was an unspoken understanding that humans had their own way of managing challenges, and the Carven decided to trust it, at least for the moment. Then the unexpected happened. A sudden shift in the nebula caused a surge of energy that disrupted the research vessel's systems. Lights flickered, instruments went offline, and communications were temporarily scrambled. The humans faced the threat immediately. They did not panic. Instead, they began to organize themselves, assessing the damage, dividing tasks, and working together to stabilize their ship. Every human seemed to know exactly what to do, even without explicit instructions. The Carven had seen many species face emergencies, but this level of calm, coordinated action was extraordinary. The Carven realized that this was more than just clever problem-solving. Humans had a way of remaining composed under pressure that allowed them to act quickly and effectively. Even when one error occurred, another human noticed it and corrected it without hesitation. There was no blame, no frustration, no fear. Only action, adaptation, and support. The Carven studied every movement, every decision, and every interaction, trying to understand the underlying pattern. Despite their skill, the situation worsened. The nebula's energy fluctuations grew stronger, affecting both the human vessel and the Carven ship that had been observing them. The Carven considered retreating, but something about the humans' courage made them pause. The humans were not reckless. They were determined, resourceful, and committed to protecting their mission. It was as if the humans had a way of turning danger into a challenge rather than a threat. Seeing this, the Carven decided to act. They maneuvered closer to the human vessel, offering assistance, not because the humans were incapable, but because they understood that cooperation could solve the problem faster. The humans, surprisingly, welcomed the help. There was no hesitation, no suspicion. They accepted the Carven presence as part of the solution, not as a threat. This simple act of trust stunned the Carven. They had never been met with openness so freely in a dangerous situation. Working together, the Carven and humans faced the nebula's energy surges side by side. Humans suggested adjustments to shield configurations, reposition sensitive instruments, and improvised solutions that were creative yet practical. The Carven contributed their own expertise, adding precision and endurance to the human ingenuity. The combination of human adaptability and Carven strength created a synergy neither species had experienced before. They moved as a team, each learning from the other, each complementing the other's skills. During the crisis, the Carven began to notice something even more remarkable. Humans did not act out of fear or duty alone. They acted out of care for themselves, for each other, and for the mission. They shared resources without hesitation, reassured one another during stressful moments, and made decisions that considered both the immediate problem and the long-term consequences. The Carven had survived for generations through discipline, endurance, and strategy, but humans demonstrated that empathy and collaboration could be equally powerful in overcoming challenges. Hours passed, and the nebula's energy began to stabilize, thanks to the combined efforts of both species. The human vessel was still functional, and the Carven ship had avoided any damage. But more importantly, both species had learned from the experience. The Carven realized that humans had not just survived, they had thrived under pressure. They had turned a dangerous situation into an opportunity to showcase their resilience, creativity, and teamwork. After the immediate crisis ended, the humans invited the Carven to review their procedures, showing them how they had adapted in real time to the unpredictable environment. The Carven were impressed not only by the solutions themselves, but by the humans' willingness to share knowledge openly. There was no pride, no secrecy, only an eagerness to collaborate and learn from one another. The Carven had rarely seen such humility combined with capability, and it left a profound impression on them. The Carven began to reflect on the deeper meaning of the encounter. Humans had faced a situation that could have overwhelmed many other species, yet they had done so calmly, creatively, and collaboratively. They had relied on each other, trusted one another, and adapted to circumstances that could not have been predicted. The Carven had always measured success in terms of individual endurance, physical power, or rigid strategy. Humans, however, showed that strength could also come from connection, flexibility, and shared purpose. As they prepared to leave, the Carven observed the humans finishing their work with care and precision. Even after the crisis, they did not rush or act impatiently. They double-checked their equipment, communicated clearly with one another, and ensured that the environment was stable before departing. The Carven realized that this approach, thoughtful, careful, and methodical, was part of what allowed humans to succeed where others might fail. Their resilience was built not just on individual skill, but on the ability to adapt, collaborate, and remain calm under pressure. During the return journey, the Carven reflected on the lessons learned. They began to see that humanity's approach to life was not reckless, but deliberate in its own way. Humans balanced risk with creativity, action with thought, and independence with cooperation. They had demonstrated that survival did not always require raw strength, but could also rely on intelligence, teamwork, and emotional awareness. The Carven had always considered strength a measure of power, endurance, and skill, but humans had redefined it in a way that was subtle, yet incredibly effective. The Carven also noticed the impact of shared responsibility. Each human acted with consideration for the others, ensuring that mistakes were corrected collectively and successes were shared. There was no competition in moments that mattered most, only a commitment to achieving the goal together. This perspective was new to the Carven, who were used to individual achievement as the primary measure of success. Humans had shown that cooperation, trust, and mutual respect could create outcomes greater than any individual effort. As the nebula receded into the distance, the Carven felt a quiet sense of admiration. Humanity had faced a challenge that could have overwhelmed many, yet they had responded with clarity, confidence, and collaboration. They had acted not from fear, but from a place of courage and intelligence. The Carven realized that humans were not only capable of surviving danger, they were capable of transforming it into opportunity, learning, and growth. The encounter also sparked reflection among the Carven crew about their own civilization. For generations, they had relied on individual skill, discipline, and endurance to survive. They had rarely considered the potential of cooperation, empathy, or creativity in dealing with unexpected challenges. Humans had shown them that success could be built on connection as much as on capability. The Carven began to see that there were lessons here, not just for exploration, but for how they approached life, culture, and society as a whole. By the time they returned to their planet, the Carven carried more than observations. They carried understanding, curiosity, and a newfound respect for humans. The crisis had been a turning point, revealing qualities in humanity that were invisible from afar, but undeniable up close. Humans were not strong in the way the Carven had originally imagined, yet they were extraordinarily capable, resilient, and adaptable. They had faced danger with courage, solved problems with creativity, and worked together with trust and care. The Carven began to see that this encounter was not just a temporary event. It had the potential to influence their civilization in profound ways. Humans had demonstrated a type of strength that complemented their own, challenging old assumptions and opening new possibilities. The Carven realized that meeting humanity had begun to change the way they thought about survival, resilience, and the meaning of true power. Even in the quiet moments after the crisis, the Carven could not stop reflecting on what they had witnessed. They remembered how humans had remained calm, creative, and cooperative in the face of uncertainty. They remembered how each action seemed to balance independence with collaboration, risk with careful thought, and courage with trust. These lessons were subtle, yet profound, and they left a lasting impression on the Carven minds and hearts. The encounter had begun as a mission of observation, but it had grown into something far greater. Humans had shown the Carven that strength could take many forms, that resilience was not limited to endurance, and that cooperation could be as powerful as skill or power. For the Carven, this realization marked the beginning of a change, a shift in perspective that would shape future interactions, strategies, and perhaps even the way their civilization understood itself. The nebula faded from view, but the lessons of that day would remain. The humans had not only survived the unexpected, they had thrived. They had acted with courage, intelligence, and empathy. And in doing so, they had shown the Carven that the universe held more than tests of strength. It held opportunities for learning, connection, and growth. The Carven had faced a challenge alongside humanity, and they had discovered a truth that would continue to shape them for generations. That strength was not only physical, but also emotional, collaborative, and creative. The journey back to the Carven homeworld was quiet, filled with reflection. Every crew member carried the memory of humanity's calm courage and adaptability. They had learned lessons that no manual or training could teach, lessons of trust, cooperation, and resilience in the face of uncertainty. The Nebula incident had transformed not only their understanding of humans, but their understanding of themselves, and it marked the beginning of a new chapter in the relationship between the two species. After the Nebula incident, the Carven returned to their homeworld with something more than reports, data, and observations. They carried a quiet but powerful realization. Humanity had changed the way they thought about life, strength, and survival. The experience had challenged everything they had believed, and the more they reflected, the more profound the change became. For the first time in generations, the Carven began to question not just what they did, but why they did it. Life on the homeworld continued as usual, but a subtle transformation was occurring within the Carven society. The elders who had once emphasized rigid discipline and individual endurance began to notice differences in the younger generation. Those who had accompanied the human mission returned inspired, eager to share the lessons they had learned. They spoke of adaptability, cooperation, and courage that did not rely on physical power. These ideas were new and unusual, and while some elders resisted, many could not ignore the truth revealed by humanity. The Carven started to experiment. In training exercises that had always tested individual strength and speed, they began introducing tasks that required teamwork, creativity, and problem-solving. Young Carven were paired together in ways that challenged their traditional roles. They were encouraged to plan, discuss, and improvise, rather than rely solely on their personal skills. At first, some struggled, uncomfortable with the shift from independence to collaboration. But gradually, they began to see the benefits. Challenges that had seemed impossible became manageable when tackled together. They learned to listen, to trust, and to value the ideas of others. The transformation was not immediate, nor was it universally accepted. Some of the older Carven resisted the change, insisting that traditional strength was the only true measure of capability. They worried that relying on cooperation or creativity might make the species vulnerable. But even among these skeptics, curiosity grew. The elders could not deny the evidence from the Nebula incident. Humans, with their different approach to life, had survived and even thrived where others might have failed. Slowly, the skeptics began to wonder whether there was something to learn from this perspective. The Carven also began to reflect on their own personal growth. Crew members who had interacted with humans found themselves thinking differently about relationships, trust, and leadership. They realized that a person did not need to be physically dominant to have influence or to succeed. A calm, creative, and cooperative approach could achieve results that brute strength alone could not. Even their own abilities felt stronger when combined with the strengths of others. This realization brought both humility and excitement, recognition that learning from others did not weaken them, but added to their capabilities. Humanity's influence extended beyond training exercises. The Carven began to adopt new ways of approaching problem-solving in research, exploration, and diplomacy. Decisions were no longer made solely by individuals or by the most senior authority. Teams worked together, sharing ideas, debating approaches, and seeking solutions collaboratively. Mistakes were no longer seen as failures, but as opportunities to learn and improve. These small shifts in thinking began to ripple across the society, changing not just the way Carven acted, but the way they thought about themselves and the world around them. During this period, the Carven also revisited their relationship with the humans. Communication became more frequent, no longer limited to observation or cautious contact. Messages were exchanged openly, with mutual curiosity and respect. Humans shared insights about collaboration, decision-making, and problem-solving, while the Carven shared knowledge about endurance, discipline, and resilience. Each side learned from the other, creating a bridge of understanding that strengthened with every interaction. The Carven discovered something remarkable about the humans' approach to challenges. Humans often seemed unafraid of failure. They tried, they experimented, and they learned from mistakes without letting them define their worth. This was different from the Carven mindset, which had long measured success by achievement and endurance. Observing humans, the Carven realized that failure could be part of growth rather than a reflection of weakness. They began to incorporate this mindset into their training and education, encouraging younger Carven to experiment, take risks, and trust in the support of their peers. As these changes spread, the Carven society began to transform in unexpected ways. Communities became more collaborative, decision-making became more inclusive, and younger Carven were empowered to contribute ideas and take initiative. They discovered that working together allowed them to tackle challenges that would have been impossible alone. They realized that adaptability, empathy, and creativity were as vital to survival as endurance, strength, and strategy. The influence of humanity was evident not just in actions, but in the very way the Carven thought about the world. One of the most profound shifts occurred in leadership. The Carven had always valued hierarchy, with the strongest and most experienced individuals in positions of authority. But after observing humans, leaders began to recognize that guidance could come from anyone, based on skill, insight, and collaboration, rather than status or age. Leadership became more flexible, and teams were encouraged to take collective responsibility for outcomes. This approach allowed the Carven to respond more effectively to challenges and made their society more resilient overall. The Shaven also began to reconsider their relationships with other species. For generations, they had relied on strength and fear to navigate interactions. But after learning from humans, they started exploring diplomacy, cooperation, and mutual understanding. They realized that relationships built on trust and shared purpose could create opportunities that brute force alone could not. This new perspective encouraged them to approach the galaxy not only as conquerors or survivors, but as learners and collaborators. Despite the excitement and growth, the Carven faced challenges. Adapting to new ways of thinking was not easy. Some struggled with the idea of relying on others, or accepting that strength could come from connection and creativity. There were disagreements and debates, but even conflict became an opportunity for learning. The Carven discovered that discussion, compromise, and collective problem-solving could lead to better outcomes than rigid adherence to old traditions. Humanity had shown them that flexibility and cooperation could be more powerful than strict rules and strength alone. As the months passed, the Carven began to implement long-term changes inspired by humans. Education systems were updated to emphasize teamwork, problem-solving, and creativity alongside physical training. Exploration missions now included mixed teams that relied on collaboration and adaptability. Even the way resources were managed changed, with emphasis on sharing, supporting one another, and learning from mistakes. The Carven had begun to build a society that was stronger not just physically, but emotionally, intellectually, and socially. The influence of humans also reached personal levels. Carven, who had never considered the value of trust and empathy in their daily lives, began to change. They communicated more openly, helped each other more willingly, and learned to value the strengths of their peers. They realized that strength was not just about what one could do alone, but about what could be achieved together. The lessons from humanity became part of their culture, slowly weaving into the fabric of their society. The Carven also reflected on the human ability to maintain optimism and morale, even in difficult situations. Humans seemed to face adversity with curiosity, humor, and calm determination. They did not allow fear or doubt to dominate their actions. The Carven observed that this mindset made humans capable of remarkable achievements, even in circumstances where physical strength or endurance alone would not have been enough. Inspired by this, the Carven began to emphasize mindset alongside skill, teaching that courage, creativity, and resilience were forms of strength in their own right. By the end of the cycle, it was clear that humanity had changed the Carven forever. Their society was no longer solely focused on endurance, discipline, and individual capability. They had embraced collaboration, creativity, empathy, and adaptability. Their understanding of strength had expanded beyond physical prowess to include emotional and intellectual resilience. The Carven had learned that true power could be subtle, shared, and flexible. Even the elders, who had initially resisted change, began to recognize the value of these lessons. They saw that the Carven were stronger as a society when they worked together, adapted to challenges, and learned from one another. They realized that humanity had shown them a way to grow without losing their identity, a way to become stronger without abandoning their core values. This recognition brought a sense of gratitude and wonder that resonated deeply within the Carven. The transformation continued quietly, with each day reinforcing the lessons learned. Carven began to approach life differently, using both strength and collaboration to face challenges. Exploration missions became more dynamic, research projects more creative, and daily interactions more thoughtful. Humanity had demonstrated that resilience and intelligence were not always visible, but they could be cultivated, shared, and applied in ways that changed the world. Ultimately, the Carven realized that meeting humanity had been more than an encounter. It had been a turning point. Humans had not only survived the Nebula crisis, but they had also shown the Carven that life could be approached differently, with courage, creativity, and trust. They had demonstrated that strength came in many forms, and that the greatest achievements often required collaboration, empathy, and adaptability. For the Carven, this meant more than learning new skills. It meant rethinking the way they lived, worked, and related to others. Humanity had taught them that change was possible, that growth could be collective, and that resilience was as much about mind and heart as it was about body. The Carven had met a species they had underestimated, and in doing so, they had discovered a path toward becoming something greater than they had ever imagined. By the time the Carven returned to the Nebula region months later, their understanding of humans had grown deeper than any observation or report could convey. They no longer saw humans as unpredictable, fragile, or ordinary. Humans had proven time and again that their strength was not measured by physical power alone, but by resilience, creativity, empathy, and the ability to trust and collaborate. The Carven ship approached the same region where the nebula had caused chaos before. This time, both species knew what to expect, but the purpose of this visit was different. It was not about observation or survival. It was about cooperation and mutual growth. Humans had invited the Carven to work together on a new project, studying the nebula's unusual energy patterns and learning how to harness them safely. This opportunity symbolized the transformation that had already begun. Two very different species, sharing knowledge, skills, and trust to achieve something neither could do alone. As the Carven disembarked onto the human vessel, there was a quiet sense of anticipation and respect. Both species understood the significance of this collaboration. Humans greeted them with calm smiles, clear instructions, and thoughtful guidance. There was no hierarchy or pretense. Each individual, human or Carven, had a role based on skill, insight, and initiative. The Carven noticed how naturally humans adapted to challenges, communicating efficiently while maintaining a sense of warmth and connection. The project required more than technical skill. It required problem-solving under unpredictable conditions. The nebula's energy patterns shifted constantly, and the team needed to monitor, adjust, and innovate in real time. The Carven contributed their endurance, precision, and discipline, while the humans offered creativity, flexibility, and emotional awareness. It quickly became apparent that each species' strengths complemented the other perfectly. Where humans were inventive but physically limited, the Carven provided stability and endurance. Where the Carven were rigid or cautious, humans offered new perspectives and unconventional solutions. Working side by side, the two species began to trust each other in a way that went beyond cooperation. The Carven had learned that humans could handle responsibility, adapt to unexpected changes, and maintain focus under stress. Humans had learned to rely on the Carven's strength, knowledge, and calm guidance. This mutual respect created an environment where innovation flourished. Tasks that would have taken days alone were accomplished in hours, and challenges that might have seemed insurmountable were solved through shared effort. During one critical moment, the nebula emitted a sudden surge of energy, destabilizing both vessel systems simultaneously. Human crew members immediately organized the response, calmly assigning tasks, checking each other's work, and improvising solutions on the fly. The Carven, trained for endurance and precision, applied their skills exactly where needed, stabilizing equipment, and executing corrective maneuvers with flawless timing. Together, the combined team overcame the surge, preventing damage and even gaining new insights into the nebula's behavior. The Carven found themselves deeply impressed. Not only did humans remain composed, but they also maintained focus on the collective goal rather than individual achievement. There was no panic, no blame, no fear. Just problem-solving, collaboration, and mutual support. This experience reinforced what the Carven had been learning for months. Humans had a type of strength that was different from, but just as important as their own. Humans could turn challenges into opportunities and transform uncertainty into discovery. After the surge, the team gathered to analyze their data. Humans explained their observations with clarity and patience, inviting the Carven to question, suggest, and contribute. The Carven, who had once measured value by endurance or precision alone, realized that insight, creativity, and communication were equally powerful tools. They learned that listening, questioning, and sharing ideas could produce results that rigid methods could not. Humanity had taught them that true strength was flexible, collaborative, and intelligent. Over the following cycles, the collaboration continued. Carven and humans shared techniques, strategies, and philosophies. The Carven introduced methods for precise monitoring, careful planning, and disciplined execution, while humans taught approaches to creativity, risk management, and cooperative problem-solving. Each lesson reinforced the other, creating a partnership that was both practical and transformative. The Carven began to see that their society could benefit from these lessons in ways far beyond space exploration. Back on their homeworld, the Carven began to implement changes inspired by the collaboration. Training programs emphasized cooperation alongside endurance, creativity alongside precision. Communities experimented with shared problem-solving, learning to trust each other and value diverse perspectives. Leadership evolved to include those who demonstrated insight and initiative, not just strength or age. Mistakes were treated as learning experiences, not failures, fostering a culture of innovation and resilience. This transformation was visible in everyday life. Carven, who had once relied solely on themselves, now worked confidently with others. They communicated openly, shared knowledge freely, and valued the strengths of those around them. The lessons from humanity were no longer abstract concepts. They were lived experiences, shaping how Carven thought, acted, and related to each other. Even small successes were celebrated as collective achievements, reinforcing the importance of cooperation and trust. The collaboration also had a profound impact on the Carven perspective of the universe. They began to approach other species with curiosity rather than caution, seeking understanding rather than dominance. They learned that cooperation and communication could lead to opportunities that brute strength or rigid rules could not achieve. Humanity had shown them that the galaxy was not just a place for survival tests, but a place for learning, growth, and meaningful connection. In personal reflection, many Carven realized that humanity had changed them not only as a society, but as individuals. They had learned patience, empathy, and flexibility. They had discovered that asking for help was not weakness, but a strength that allowed them to achieve more. They had seen the value of shared responsibility, humor, and encouragement. Humans had shown them that life could be approached with courage, curiosity, and cooperation, and that true strength included the ability to adapt, trust, and connect. The impact extended to the younger Carven, who were inspired by the human example. They embraced explore,